Good last call for pop or pizza. Still some pizza out there if you wish. So we'll start in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
No, that's a JVC.
Hi, may I get a snapshot?
Yes, absolutely.
Or just have a little discussion.
Why it's called Mars 1? I said it's the first one. And I was told no, that's not right. What do you think I said?
What? Yeah. We got. I had to deliver something to Mary. She's here for dinner.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Spring Ash Lecture as part of our 2015 Ash Lectureship series. We're so glad you're here tonight for a very special evening on this snowy Michigan night. Welcome to MCC's Greenville campus. Stanley and Blanche Ash were longtime friends and generous benefactors of Montcalm Community College. The building that we are in tonight is the Stanley and Blanche Ash Technical and Learning Center. We have a building on our campus, the Stanley P. Ash Building, which is for the sciences and nursing. They have given to us over the years generously. He was the first chair of our board and a member of the first board elected on March 2nd, 1965, exactly 50 years ago, and we celebrate that throughout this year. He was also the first president of our MCC Foundation in almost at 1881, not quite back that far, 1981, and was highly engaged until his passing. They have been wonderful friends of ours in so many ways and have benefited us not only in buildings and other wonderful endowments, but also the Cultural Enhancement Fund. And thanks to that fund and its committee, we're able to finance this wonderful series. And the mission of our series is to bring to our college and community experts that are known both nationally and internationally in their respective fields. We've got a very special guest tonight. We ordered this snow just for him because he hails from Houston. And we'll meet him in a few moments. I'd like to now invite you to help me greet our MCC President, Bob Ferrentino, who will introduce our guest tonight. Please help me welcome Bob Ferrentino.
Thank you, Gary, and welcome. I'll just reiterate, we're glad you came out. Happy spring, Michigan, yeah? We do have a very special guest with us tonight. I've been fortunate, and a few of us were fortunate to meet with Andrew this afternoon at lunch with our students on our Sidney campus. And the house was packed, just like it is now, and it was a great luncheon for our students to have a chance to speak with him. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest tonight. Dr. Andrew Feustel is a Michigander. Born and raised in Detroit area, graduated from Lake Orion High School, yay. But here's something even better. He's a graduate of Montcalm Community College as well, which I always say he's one of us from our point of view. But from there, sorry, Drew. Okay, Andy, yeah. From there, Drew went to Purdue University, where he achieved his Bachelor of Science degree and Master's degree. From then, he went on to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, where he received his PhD in geological sciences. Now, there's a couple of nice facts, neat facts, fun things you should know about our guest. While attending Montcalm Community College, Dr. Feustel worked as an auto mechanic at International Auto Works Limited in Farmington Hills. The best part about that, at least from my perception, is the fact he was working on restoring 1950s Jaguars. Had to be pretty cool. While at Purdue, Drew showed the side that I know I've seen today. He likes to have fun as well. He served for 3 years as the Grand Prix chairman and the team kart driver for Sigma Phi Epsilon at Purdue University. Is that the gearhead side that you talked about today? Yeah, that's part of it. But seriously, after finishing his PhD at Queen's University in Ontario, he went to work as a geophysicist for the Engineering Seismology Group in Ontario, where he worked on installing and operating microseismic monitoring equipment in underground mines throughout eastern Canada and the United States. From there, in 1997, Drew began working for the ExxonMobil Exploration Company in Houston as an exploration geophysicist, some kind of light work that he gets involved in. Listen to this. That work as an exploration geophysicist worked on designing and providing operational oversight of land, marine, and borehole seismic programs worldwide. In 2000, Drew was selected as a mission specialist by NASA and immediately began extensive training to someday fulfill the role that we're going to hear about tonight. Much to Drew's presentation tonight, we'll let him do that because the origins of the universe are not necessarily in my bailiwick, but there is something I do know, and that is that you're in for a very interesting evening, a very enjoyable evening with our guest, Dr. Andrew Feustel.
That was a wonderful introduction. Most of my presentation's already done with the introduction. I'll try to add a few things. And I'm holding my iPhone tonight not because I'm texting or tweeting, but because I'm trying to control the slideshow. So keep your fingers crossed that the technology will continue to operate for the rest of the night. There's not much more to say, but other than aside what was already mentioned, that I grew up in Lake Orion, Michigan. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of being a Michigan native. There are a handful of Michigan astronauts, and I can't name them all right now, but many of you have probably heard of some of them. It's a great legacy, and there are also a number of astronauts that are community college graduates. Not many current astronauts that have come from community college, but many over the years that have graduated from community college. So I'm not alone, and the opportunities that were afforded to me through what I learned in community college and then took on to university and ultimately into my career were very important for me in trying to understand what direction my life was going to take. And didn't realize or have any idea at the time how that was all going to fit together, but I can tell you that when I was at community college, at that time I was already interested in space and space exploration. That's probably why I decided to pursue a career in science rather than industrial design. Those were my two choices: design cars here in Detroit or go off and follow a science career. And ultimately what I wanted to do was be able to mine resources or utilize resources on other orbiting bodies. So I had that in my mind that I could go and become a geologist, go to a university like Purdue that has graduated as many astronauts as any other organization in the country, as many as I think we have 23 astronauts, and be able to mine resources on another planet. Now, we're not there yet. I grew up watching the Flintstones and George Jetson, and I always say to people, I thought I was going to be George Jetson when I grew up, but it turns out we're still like Fred Flintstone in the space program. We're really just getting started. So as we talk tonight about the space program, and I talk about my experiences, and we talk about where we're headed, remember that the human spaceflight program is only 50 years old. Now, I will go on a limb and admit that I'm going to be 50 in August, so the human spaceflight program is as old as me. So that's not a lot of time for anything to be under development. If you compare that to any institution like this one, right, it's the same age. So we're really just getting started at this. We're really in our infancy in our development of human spaceflight. So keep that in mind as we talk about it. We're not George Jetson yet, but we'll get there eventually. Most of my background is shown up on the screen here, so we'll just skip right ahead and start talking about the missions that I flew on. I want to talk a little bit about my experiences in space and what those missions were like for me. The first was STS-125, launched in May of 2009. That was my first mission. I was selected as an astronaut in the year 2000. I trained for 6 years supporting the human spaceflight program and then was selected for that mission, which means we trained and prepared for the mission for 3 years before we actually launched in space in 2009. The second mission was STS-134, is the other emblem that was shown on the left of the screen there, and I'll talk about that one afterwards. This was our launch of STS-125. This was my first experience riding on a rocket. I can tell you that NASA has a simulator for everything. Everything that we do, we have a simulator for, except this. This right here, when you launch on a rocket in space, NASA has no way to prepare you for that. You can talk to the other astronauts, you can watch videos, you can get other people's experiences, but we don't have a simulator that actually launches us into space or pretends to do that. So there were a lot of things going through my mind for the first space launch. So first was, we get into the spacecraft about 3 hours before it launches into space. And we climb in, and the rocket's standing up like it is here, and we're all laying on our backs like you'd be in these chairs, only flipped over on your back, and you're waiting there for about 3 hours. So I did two things waiting for the rocket to launch. I slept, and I peed in my diaper, because there's not a lot else to do while you're waiting on the launch pad to launch into space. When the countdown finally started, and this was actually our second attempt at going to the launch pad for this mission, when the launch countdown finally started, and we were at about 10. When the countdown got to 10, I thought, hey, they're serious. They're going to actually send us to space today. You really never know until the rocket lights. And then when they got down to 3, and I mentioned this earlier, I started questioning all the things I did in my life that had me sitting on top of all this rocket fuel that was about to blast me into space. You know, no idea what was going to happen. And then the countdown hit 0. And immediately, that's when the solid rocket motors light. Those are the white, long rockets that you see on the side of the orange fuel tank. When those things light, it's like somebody ran into the back of my chair with a pickup truck. I mean, it was immediate, it was violent, and I knew exactly at that moment that the rocket ship was jumping off the planet. I mean, it felt like it was blasting off. It was literally blasting off the planet. And the only thing that went through my mind was, I hope the rocket knows where it's going, because clearly we have left planet Earth. We are going somewhere right now, and I hope the rocket knows where that is. So what was exciting about this moment was that also at the exact instant we launched off the rocket, off the launch pad, a whole bunch of alarms started going off inside the cockpit, like emergency alarms. Now, I had spent the last 3 years training in our neutral buoyancy laboratory, our big pool, for the spacewalks that we're going to do on this mission. I didn't train with the pilot and the commander and the other 2 mission specialists who ride on the flight deck of the space shuttle. I rode on the mid deck. There's 2 decks. The guys that fly the vehicle ride on top, and we sit at the bottom, looking at the lockers. So these alarms started going off, and I thought to myself, well, that's great. I just launched off on my first mission in space, and now we're going to die. You know, we're all going to die right now. We're not going to make it to space because all these alarms are going off. Fortunately, the rest of the crew had, the guys who weren't doing the spacewalks, had been training for these types of emergencies, these situations, these alarms that they need to react to. And in most cases, the space shuttle has the capability of actually recovering from all of its failures. It's redundant, has redundant systems. So it was a very exciting time. The alarm soon went out. Mission Control called them and said, don't worry, everything's fine. You guys can keep going to space. I thought, great, now we're going to go to space. So, you know, I went from happy to frowning to happy again. And we're headed back towards space. And then, of course, 30 seconds later, another alarm started going off. And then I started frowning again, like, okay, are we going to make it to space or are we not going to make it to space? Eventually, we obviously did make it to space because I'm standing here to talk about it. But it was a very exciting ride. And for this launch, really, it was about the fear of the unknown. We had no idea what to expect. There was no sort of simulated preparedness for the launch. And it was exciting and violent and bouncing all over the place. And just like kind of the movies make it look, but successful, fortunately, in getting us to space. And this was our destination. This is the Hubble Space Telescope. I will add right now to say that this year is the 25th anniversary of the Hubble Space Telescope being in space. So it was launched in the year 1990. There had been 5 crews. We were the 5th crew and the last crew to visit the Hubble Space Telescope to repair it, upgrade it, and keep it in orbit. It's floating about 300 miles, 350 miles above the planet. It's the size of a school bus, approximately. And it is actually 100 miles higher in orbit than the International Space Station. So our view of Earth from space at this altitude is actually quite a bit different than what we see when we're at the space station altitude, looking down at the Earth. We had a 13-day mission, and we had 5 days within those 13 days to do our spacewalks. But the first thing we had to do was reach out and grab the Hubble Space Telescope. So Megan MacArthur, one of our crew members, reached out with the Canadian robotic arm on the space shuttle and grabbed a hold of the telescope and then placed it in the back of the space shuttle payload bay. You think of the space shuttle as like a pickup truck with the cabin in the front where the crew rides, and the whole back end is built for payloads, taking those things to space, and in our case, capturing the Hubble Space Telescope, setting it in the back of the pickup truck or the payload bay, and then allow us to go outside and carry out the spacewalks. So this is our first day out for spacewalking. I'm lucky to be hanging out in the spacesuit here. Behind me, you can see the silver object is the Hubble Space Telescope just set in the back of the shuttle payload bay. We did 5 spacewalks back to back, which means there was 2 groups of spacewalkers. Myself and John Grunsfeld were one crew, and then Mike Good and Mike Massimino were the other crew. I went out on the first day, the 3rd day, and the 5th day, and the other spacewalkers went out on the 2nd day and the 4th day. So 5 days in a row, we went outside to fix the telescope. When you're not outside fixing the telescope, you're inside quarterbacking the guys who are outside. So my job when the other crew were outside working on the telescope was to read them the procedures, was to tell them what was next, tell them what tools they needed to get, what was next in the procedure, and how to carry out the repairs. I mentioned that we had trained for this mission for 3 years, so everybody knew what was going to happen next. But it's really important when you get there, so that you don't make any mistakes, that we go over it, we read the script, we make sure we're doing the right things at the right time. That also allows us to handle any contingencies that may come along. But the view from space is amazing, especially from the back of the shuttle payload bay. And this is a great shot looking out the window of the space shuttle back at the telescope now. You can see there's actually an astronaut's feet sticking out of the telescope there in the lower part of the image. And I can do this fancy thing where I circle his feet. So that's where the astronaut is. His feet are hanging out the back of the telescope. And there's another guy on the robotic arm that's actually stuffed in there face first as well. So we literally, it's like opening a refrigerator, but the telescope's quite big. So you open the doors up and you go inside to repair the components that are in there. One of the things that was unique about our mission was that we actually replaced circuit boards inside the telescope. This has never been done before by astronauts because most of the things that we work on in space are designed to be removed with our big gloves and our big tools. The Hubble Space Telescope it was only partially designed to be serviced by astronauts. And more importantly, these circuit boards were never designed to be taken out in space. But the shuttle payload bay is only so big. It can only bring up so many components when we do a repair like this. So for some of the instruments that we fixed, we couldn't bring up complete replacements. We couldn't bring up one refrigerator to replace another. We had to actually open up the circuit boards and extract those cards out. That was one of the reasons it took us 3 years to train and prepare for the mission, because we had to design over 100 new tools to be used by us as the astronaut operators with the telescope to get in there and make the repairs that we had to do. So this was an example. This circuit board, and it's actually the slot there is missing. It's about a third of the way down. We've already extracted the card, actually near the top. There was a panel in front of these circuit boards that had 113 number 4 screws on it. And if you know how big a number 4 screw is, it's like the size of the fingernail on my pinky. I mean, it's really a small, small screw. And what was important for this mission was we didn't want to lose any of those screws because everything floats in space. So the challenge for us was that any of those little screws that we released, we didn't want to go floating into the images of the Hubble Space Telescope, or the next thing we would identify would be like the screw nebula, and there would be a screw floating inside one of these Hubble images. So that was really critical for us, and that was an important part about what we did for this mission was, not only in this case for this instrument, but for one more, we pulled out circuit cards and replaced them, and that was something that contributed to the success of the work that we did. And this is why we do it. I think most of us have seen images that the Hubble Space Telescope shows us of space, shows us of deep space. This is a Hubble Deep Field image, in other words. It's an image where the telescope locked onto a point in the sky and was just left there for long exposure, just like a camera would at night. And you can see all of these galaxies in this image. Most of these things you see in this image are galaxies like our own Milky Way galaxy, which has thousands or millions of stars in it. And what's special about this picture is, if you hold your thumb up to the night sky, you would cover all of these in this image. You could cover the space that these represent. So imagine now, these things are everywhere. They're all around us in space. More galaxies, it's difficult for me to imagine that these are out there, but Hubble has shown us these and so many more things that are so far away from us in space that represent the beginning of when we think the universe first originated. And to me, it's just spectacular. Star fields, we have one star that keeps our planet alive. This is a field of stars out in space, in a star nursery with all these stars in one place. So Hubble is probably really the most important scientific instrument that humans have and will ever build. Now, maybe in 100 or 200 years from now, we'll be saying something different. But right now, in the history of mankind, Hubble really is the instrument that has told us more about the universe that we live in than any other instrument that humans have ever made. Eventually, we came home. After 13 days in space, we landed in the California desert, which was a really neat experience. It wasn't great for our families who are waiting for us in Florida, which is where we normally land. But the weather was bad in Florida. The space shuttle does have some very specific requirements when it comes to landing, and weather is one of them. So I like to show this picture because it's a good opportunity for me to talk about what was it like coming home. We talk a lot about what it's like going to space and being in space. But I can tell you that space flight is almost more emotional when you return home than it is when you launch into space. And that's because Earth is the only place that humans live. This is our only home. And something unexpected happened to me when I came home on this space shuttle, in particular here, not on my second launch, but this first one. And that was because, well, we landed in the desert. And when you land in the space shuttle, you land on the runway and you stop and you wait at the end. And eventually, well, there's a few things that happen, right? You're tired, everything's heavy. The small camcorder that I was holding in my hands while we were re-entering the atmosphere became so heavy that I could no longer hold it in my hand and had to set it on the ground. It'd be like not being able to hold this phone up anymore. It just becomes so heavy because your muscles stop operating. They stop getting the neurons firing that allow them to hold things up. So things like that happen. Those are the normal things for an astronaut when you come home. But waiting there on the runway, eventually the recovery crew comes in and they open the hatch to the space shuttle. And they come in to get you. But what was special about that for me was sitting there, and I was sitting right next to the hatch. I was sort of minding my own business, tired, thinking about how heavy everything was. And they opened the hatch. And immediately when they opened the hatch, the air from inside the shuttle went out, and the air from outside in the desert rushed into the cabin. And it completely filled the cabin, and it completely filled my mind and my senses. The air went into my nose and in my brain, in my eyes. Without seeing outside, I could see the desert. I could see everything about the desert. I could smell dirt and mold and wind and all these things and the heat. And I had a vision in my mind of the desert that you see out in this image. And it was really overwhelming to me because I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that coming home was going to be almost more emotional than launching into space in the first place. And it says something about humans and us on this planet that when we look down at Earth, I mean, this is all we've got. This is the place we live. And it's really special to us. Whether we realize it or not, we are completely and inherently linked with this planet. This is our home. So, anyways, it was a fantastic opportunity. It was a great flight, and I was happy to be home. I was really very fortunate because about 3 months after arriving home, or 4 months after arriving home, I was reassigned to one of the last space shuttle missions, to STS-134. And as an astronaut who came into the class, of the 2000 class into NASA, I was never sure if I was going to get any shuttle flights at all, let alone 2. So I felt very lucky to kind of just make it under the wire and get assigned to this second flight on STS-134. We launched 2 years and 4 days after my first launch. So May of 2009, May 11th of 2009, and May 16th of 2011. So 2 years and 5 days. This was our crew. On my first flight, we had a crew of 7, and we had 4 rookies. On my second flight, we were all space flight veterans. You'll recognize the commander right in the middle. That's Mark Kelly. He's married to Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, who was very unfortunately shot in the head in Arizona about 3 months before we launched into space. And that was a very difficult time for Mark Kelly and his family and everybody associated with them, obviously Congresswoman Giffords as well. But it also had a significant impact on our crew because we had been training together for 2 years for this mission, and we weren't sure if at that time the crew was going to get split up, and it really started to have an impact on what we thought the success of the mission was going to be. Fortunately, I can tell you that Congresswoman Giffords is doing well now. She was doing well enough by the time that we launched into space that Mark was able to join us for the mission. And that was really key for us, to keep us together, to keep us cohesive. And I think it was key for him as well to be able to carry out that work and contribute the way that we had all trained. You see me on the left, all the way at the right is Greg Shamatoff. He had spent one 6 month stay on the space station already. Just to his left is an Italian, Roberto Vittori, sent by the European Space Agency. To the left of him, just to the right of Mark Kelly, was our pilot. His name is Greg Johnson. And there's a few people in this room that know my first pilot from my first flight. His name was also Greg Johnson. So this is trivia for everybody. When you're playing Trivial Pursuit later in life, there will be a question, and it'll be, who is the only astronaut that flew with pilot Greg Johnson 2 times in space, and that was not the same person? Like Greg Johnson was a different person, and that's me, because I'm the only one that was on 125 and 134, and both times the pilot was Greg Johnson, but it's a different Greg Johnson. So anyways, that's trivia. To the left of Mark Kelly is Michael Fink. Michael Fink, until right now, is the U.S. astronaut with the most time in space. He's spent 389 days in space, 2 6-month missions to the space station and our launch on the space shuttle crew. However, a month ago, we launched Commander Scott Kelly, the twin brother of Mark Kelly, to space, and he'll be in space for a year. So he will surpass Mike Fink's record by a long shot, and will at that time be the U.S. astronaut, and I think just the U.S. astronaut with the most time in space. There are Russian cosmonauts who have spent a lot of time in space, even more than what we have done. So our destination for this launch was the International Space Station. And the International Space Station is really glorious to see in space. I didn't know what to expect when we were approaching it, and what I can tell you is it kind of looked like a city to me, that we were coming up to a city or a large, just an amazing large structure. It's about the size of a football field, all told. And the internal volume that we can move around in and float through is similar to the size of a 5-bedroom home. So there's quite a lot of space in there. When our crew made it to space, once we were there was 13 people on board at the same time. So there's a lot of space to move around, and I'll show you a picture of the crew in a minute. Here's our launch from Florida on that day in 2011. I talked a lot about the first launch, and that was the fear of the unknown. And this launch was the fear of the known. Like, I knew exactly what to expect, and I thought, oh, I hope I make it to space this time without any alarms. It was just as exciting, just as amazing. No alarms went off on this flight, so we were smiling from here to here all the way to orbit, and it was a spectacular ride into space. By the time we get to space, we're doing 25,000 feet per second, or about 17,500 miles an hour. So you are moving around the planet so fast that we go around the Earth every 90 minutes. So every 90 minutes we circle the planet, we see 16 sunrises and sunsets every 24-hour period, and it's pretty spectacular. This was our crew when we got to space. I already introduced the crew on the right. That's the space shuttle crew. This was our crew on the left. Now, I actually gave it away already, because usually what I say is, I'll let you figure out which crew just came off the beach in Florida and which crew has been in space for 6 months. You can kind of tell by the skin tone who just came off the beach. So we joined 3 Russians right up the middle here, 3 Russian cosmonauts. To the left is Paolo Nespoli. He's another Italian astronaut. Above him, Katie Coleman, female U.S. astronaut. And to the right over there in the light blue is Commander Ron Guerin, who was just finishing up his 6 months on orbit. So 12 of us on orbit at the same time, and we had a wonderful time. We were there on orbit with them for 11 days. We were docked to the space station. This is why we flew into space, because this is a payload that we brought to space with us to install on the International Space Station. This is the alpha magnetic spectrometer. This payload was under development for 16 years by 16 different nations, and it cost $2 billion to build. When Congress decided we were going to retire the space shuttles, our mission was actually taken off the manifest. We were not supposed to fly in space. But because of this alpha magnetic spectrometer and the international pressure from the science community to fly it in space, because of the development that has gone into it, we were put back on the manifest, and we took alpha magnetic spectrometer to space. So I've been associated with 2 very important scientific missions, but not because I'm a scientist. This is just how we do things in space, and I got lucky to be on 2 missions that have some very important impact on astrophysics and astronomy. So what do we know? So there are two different types of energy that we can measure in space, and Hubble looks at essentially visible light rays in space. But there's a lot of things that Hubble can't see. The alpha-magnetic spectrometer looks at charged cosmic particles. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't build this thing. I know very little about it except the basic principles of how it works. But I can tell you that it's a good complement to the Hubble Space Telescope because the Hubble has a certain spectra of light rays that it can see or image with its energy bandwidth. And the AMS spectrometer sees charged particles that pass through the magnet. And so by having particles that pass through the magnet, they see the different deflection of these particles, they can see the amount of energy in these particles and the speed, and they can characterize those particles as being matter or antimatter, or protons, antiprotons, whatever you want to say they are, and we can detect that different energy. What's important is that on Earth we build particle accelerators to try and accelerate particles really fast and then break other particles up and then identify what comes out of that. But those things are actually naturally formed in space, and so by putting a detector in space, we have space as our natural particle accelerator. So we can receive particles of high energy and high velocity naturally in space and detect those things that we would normally have to try to create on Earth with particle accelerators. So what did we learn from Hubble? We learned from Hubble that the universe is accelerating, but it's not accelerating as fast as we think it should based on how many particles we can see with Hubble. So there's two things happening. The universe is expanding, but not at a rate that we think there is, and we can't see all the things, all the glue that's holding it together, and that glue is what we call dark matter. And the energy that's pushing the universe apart is called dark energy, because we don't really know what it is. We just know the universe is expanding because of what we've seen with the Hubble Space Telescope. So AMS is supposed to help with that. You look at a pie chart of the composition of the cosmos, and we represent in the green sliver there, that's 4%. That's what Hubble can see. That's the energy and the light that Hubble can see. That's the only thing we know about our universe is the 4% that Hubble shows us. The rest of it is what we call a combination of dark matter and dark energy. That's why AMS is so important, because we're trying to detect what is the dark matter, what's the antimatter, what are the other things in the universe that make up the 96% of what we don't know about because we can't see it. Hubble cannot see those particles. So AMS is an important scientific piece of equipment, just like Hubble was. It's yet to be seen whether or not it will reveal all of the secrets to the universe that we don't yet know, but we're certainly trying with it. On this mission, we did 4 spacewalks as well. We did 5 for Hubble, 4 for this one. There was only 3 spacewalkers, myself, Mike Fink, and Greg Shamatoff. And in this image is me here and Greg Shamatoff there on one of our EVAs hiding. And I like to show this picture because it gives you a good idea of the scale of the International Space Station. We are out on one of these truss structures. This is not an area that we would be able to live inside. This is a hollow girder, kind of like a bridge structure that holds those golden solar arrays that you see sticking out into space. And those are what we use to collect energy and feed our batteries and give us power on the space station. In the image is also the alpha-magnetic spectrometer. So the last picture you saw in the back of the shuttle payload bay, we used a Canada robotic arm on the shuttle and the Canada 2 robotic arm on the space station to hand off the AMS and place it out here on the International Space Station. And you can see it right there. So that's AMS now living out on the space station until the space station deorbits and basically comes back to Earth. But I show this image because it gives you an idea of the scale of how big this is. We trained for this mission for about 1.5 years underwater in a large pool, just like we did for the Hubble mission at the Johnson Space Center. We have a swimming pool there. That's not for swimming, it's for training. It's 100 yards wide, 200 yards long, 100 feet wide, 200 feet long, and 40 feet deep. It has 6 million gallons of water. It's a really big pool. And inside that pool, we have a mock-up of about half of the space station, because that's all that will fit in there. And we work in that in our spacesuits underwater to practice all of the activities that we're going to do when we're actually in space making the repairs. The reason is we don't want to make any mistakes. We want to know that every single action we're going to take, every movement of our hand, every time we place a tether somewhere that's going to keep us safe from floating away, we want to know exactly where that's going to be when we go to space to do it, because we don't have a lot of time and we can't afford to make any mistakes and we don't want any surprises. So we train for a long time for these missions to make sure we're ready to go when we get there. 4 spacewalks. I was fortunate to go out on the first, the second, and the third day. And then for the last spacewalk, Greg Shamatoff and Mike Fink finished off our spacewalking work. And I'm proud to say that we didn't lose any tools and we didn't break anything. And those are the 2 rules of an EVA activity for a spacewalker. Don't break anything and don't lose anything. If you can manage that, you're in pretty good shape. It's a great picture of Earth from space at night. Those lights you see are natural lights. We see some of that are as we pass over the different cities, the different tones that you see from space. It's spectacular to see the stars. We really do see the stars like that. If you look long enough and have a nice night pass without the sun shining on the Earth, you can have these vivid, beautiful images of Earth from space. This is our space shuttle Endeavour docked to the space station before we went home. And you can kind of see it there at the top. This was the only picture that's ever been taken of the space shuttle docked to the space station. We've been building the space station for 11 years with the space shuttle. The space shuttle has been taking up all these components, but we never had an opportunity to take a picture like this, because in order to take this picture, you have to have somebody who's not there and out in space with a camera to take a photo. So we were lucky, and the Russians worked with this at the time, to have 3 of those space station crews leave the space station while we were there in their Russian rocket. And as they were flying around the space station, they were able to take a camera and photo document the fact that the shuttle was part of this historical assembly in space. And so this is kind of something that captures history. And I was sleeping at the time inside the space station along with the rest of my crew when this picture was taken. Another thing that's kind of neat to point out here is that all of these pieces that you see that make up the space station were never assembled together on Earth before they were put together in space. And they all came up separately, so every one of those pieces, that truss segment that runs across that I talked about that we were climbing around on, so this is the truss where we work, and that supports a lot of our avionics systems and our power supplies and environmental control, radiators, all that sort of equipment. So we can't live inside there. That's our truss or girder structure. And then along the center here, this is where astronauts live, right down the middle, including the little T at the end. There's a couple of segments off the ends there. So it's like a long tube, and none of those pieces were ever mated up together on Earth before they were joined together in space. And that's a real testament to the engineering that went into these things. There have been some challenges with spacecraft in the history of our space program that have crashed due to mismatches between English and metric units. But in this case, none of the units were wrong, and all of these pieces have fit together and continue to operate normally in space. We eventually landed at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida after a 16-day mission. Unfortunately, we landed at night. So for our first launch and landing, where we didn't come back to Florida when our family was waiting for us, that was unfortunate for them because they couldn't see us when we landed. And for this landing, it was also a little bit unfortunate for them because we landed at 2 a.m. So they didn't get to see us coming from a distance, a great distance away, and slowly gliding into the runway. All they saw was basically this. At the last moment, they could hear us coming, but they couldn't see us, and then we went ripping by, at 150 miles an hour down the runway, trying to slow down before we got to the end. So, but still great to come home. It was a fantastic opportunity and a great mission. Space shuttles are retired now. We've got them all on a stick in a museum somewhere around the country. Space Shuttle Endeavour, my space vehicle, the last one that I rode on, is actually in California at the California Science Center. So now we get to space. This is how we ride to space on the Russian Soyuz rocket that has 3 astronauts. or cosmonauts at the very tippy top. The rest of that is all rocket fuel. That's what it takes to get humans up into space, and we go to the International Space Station. Within the next few years, we have 2 private companies that are building us spacecraft to get us to space. That is Boeing on the left, a little capsule up on top, and SpaceX, who's building the Dragon space capsule on the right. SpaceX actually is a company that has a cargo supply ship that we use right now to go to space, and so it's not taking humans right now, but SpaceX is bringing cargo up into space and bringing food, clothing, experiments, equipment to us on the space station. And eventually they're going to transition to flying humans on those spacecraft along with the Boeing spaceship as well. So that'll become our new taxi ride to and from the space station, and we'll quit spending our money in Russia and start spending our money back here in the U.S. To get ourselves to space. NASA is also building what we call a deep space exploration vehicle, the NASA Space Launch System, SLS system, that supports the Orion spacecraft. It's a small capsule that's a lot like the old Apollo rockets, only it's bigger, and it's designed to hold 7 people. And the intent with that space vehicle is to take us back to the moon, eventually onto Mars, and potentially do some asteroid exploration as well. This was the rocket that launched in December as a test flight where we shot that capsule up, which is right on the top of this rocket. We sent that 3,000 miles away from Earth, brought it back into the atmosphere and tested some of its systems. In a year and a half, we're going to launch what we call EM1, which is the mission that's highlighted there. That's a bigger version of the one we launched in December. So in December, we were really testing the capsule just at the top of the rocket. On EM1, we're going to test 3/4 of the propulsion system. So we've got the big rocket stacked up with the solid rocket motors on the side, capsules back on top. So this is our next test flight in 2017. Not going to put humans on it yet, but we're getting there. So we're slowly ramping up. The hardware is built, and we're trying to develop and have the capability to actually take us off into space. And eventually, we want to take that vehicle to Mars. The idea is, as humans, we're going to continue to explore low Earth orbit and do experiments on the International Space Station, but we're going to use that new spacecraft to go farther, deeper into space and do more exploration than what we would normally do. I think this is my parting slide. It's Michigan, can you tell? The thumb is here, there's the thumb. It's kind of the Michigan-Ontario border there, and that was about the best I could do with some of the shots that I had. But it's a great shot, and it shows you a nice view of Earth from the International Space Station. A little lower in altitude than where Hubble is, and the view is actually quite different, but it's a beautiful sight to see from up in space. So that's all I have for slides. I'm going to roll about a 12-minute video, and if we can just bring the lights completely down for the video, that would be great. Please nobody fall asleep. I think we should be okay. We'll play some loud music, and then we'll open it up for question and answer after that. That's okay. The initiative to retire the space shuttle was put in motion back after we lost Columbia in 2003 when George Bush said, we're going to do something else, we're going to go back to the moon. And so that really set the wheels in motion to retire the space shuttle. The shuttle was designed to build the space station, and the space station is built. It's done. We're still going there with experiments, but we don't need the shuttle, we don't need the payload bay, we don't need that payload capability, the pickup truck, to take big modules to space anymore. We're done doing that, so there's really no need for it anymore. All the way in the back.
I watched a documentary on this last night. They showed the thing in space. Was the most interesting part of it was there's a stuck bolt, and they get a special wrench to get that bolt. And if it's broken off, they had it really twisted hard. If they had it broken off, they said it would have been the end of the mission right there.
Yeah, so that was that a question, or were you just
No,
asking?
I just noticed that, but with that, you did that, I saw your
So we had more than one stuck bolts on that mission.
this is one big old,
Yeah, this is a big one where we actually, Mike Massimino had to break a handrail off of something. And when I showed you the image of the circuit boards and the 113 tiny screws, well, what I didn't talk about was in front of that panel was a handrail that had a strip bolt on it. And in order to get that handrail off, which we thought we were going to be able to, but it was stripped when he went to remove the bolt, we had to actually have him break that. We don't like to break things in space, especially not the Hubble Space Telescope, but in this case, we had to get Mike Massimino to physically break the handrail off before we could get the 113 tiny screws off and then get at the circuit boards inside. So that was one of the drama, some of the drama for the mission.
How will the James Webb Telescope differ from other?
James Webb Space Telescope has the ability to see deeper in space or farther back in time. It can't do everything Hubble does, so if Hubble has a bandwidth like this, James Webb Space Telescope has a bandwidth like this. So it's a little bit better at looking into deep space, but it can't see the nearer stuff as well as Hubble can. So less bandwidth, but it can look farther back in time and space.
When you're in space, are you able to shower and like use that?
Yes, use the bathroom, shower, no. We don't have any showers in space. We take sponge baths in space, basically wet washcloth, and we have what's called waterless shampoo, which doesn't work very good, but you can put shampoo on a washcloth and rub your head. And the bathroom, yes, pretty normally, and we have a toilet in space that's very similar to what we have here, but has a few different operating principles. The hat, sir.
When you launch into space, when the parts fall off, what do you do with them?
If parts fall off in space, we try to grab them and not let them float away. That's very important. That's why I say we try not to lose any tools or any equipment in space, because we don't want stuff floating away. Some of those things can come back around and hit the space station, and they can put holes in the space station. So anything that floats in space, we like to grab a hold of it, or at least know where it's going, so that we can track it and make sure it doesn't come back around 90 minutes later and slam into the side of the spacecraft. Go ahead, sir.
I've heard that a significant percentage of your training involves just getting used to using the suit, and in particular, the gloves are difficult to use. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a good comment. We do spend a lot of time training in the suit. So for the Hubble mission, for every hour we spent in space, we spent 10 hours underwater in the suit. So I did, what did we say, 27 hours of work in space. Means I spent about 270 hours in the suit underwater training for that mission. And the gloves are very difficult to work with. The whole suit's actually really hard to work with. We have some challenges with the design of the suit that affects our shoulders. Primarily it's our shoulders and our hands, our ability to work through the stiffness of the suit, the pressure of the suit. And the gloves are like wearing, it's kind of like wearing a couple sets of welder's gloves, really thick, heavy gloves. So part of the reason we practice so much in the pool is that you learn about what that feedback is on your fingers. You know, normally when you don't have gloves, you can just feel the bolts and things that you're touching. But when you have the gloves on and you're underwater, you have to reteach your fingers what that feels like to be touching something and sort of translate the feelings that are coming through the gloves into your fingertips to know what you're doing. In the back, sir?
Related to that particular question, Drew, how much does the training that you do underwater, where you still have the effects of gravity and the resistance of the water, to what degree does that really equate to what you really do in space?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and something that people don't realize is when you see us work in space, most of the time you see us moving very slowly. We kind of look like we're in slow motion sometimes. A few of those videos were sped up so the astronauts were moving quickly, but for the most part we do everything very slowly in space. And the reason for that is that nothing has any weight in space that we know of like on Earth, but it has mass and it has inertia. So very large objects can be moved. I mean, objects that weigh thousands of pounds can be moved by touching them with your finger. Just a touch will move a large object. But it's also very difficult to stop a large object like that if it's moving quickly. So that large objects, small objects, we always try to move them very slowly or not impart any unintended motion on them. So the advantage of working in the pool is that the drag that's imparted on the suit by the water actually forces us to move slowly, because you can't move your hand or your arm with the suit on quickly through the water. So it's actually sort of positive training. It's not that we're trying to move slowly in the pool, but the water forces us to move slowly. But when we get to space, that's exactly the way we want to operate. It's very slowly without moving anything quickly. And so the training, although it doesn't seem like it's directly related, is actually a positive training event for us in the pool.
Did it feel different to you?
Well, yeah, it feels different. It does. Floating in the suit is very different in space than it is in the water, but the suit floats the same way, and the equipment floats the same way in the pool as it does in space. It's just that you inside of the suit are floating in space, whereas in the water, your down is down. So your feet feel the bottom of the spacesuit. The little girl in the purple.
How do you sleep when you're floating?
How do we sleep when we're floating? We sleep however we want to sleep. In fact, I have actually fallen asleep floating. Just floating in the middle of the room, I've fallen asleep on a number of occasions. But normally what we do is we climb inside of a sleeping bag that's made out of fleece, like a fleece jacket, nice and soft. We climb inside a sleeping bag, and we attach the sleeping bag to the wall, or the ceiling, or the floor, or wherever we want, and we just sleep. It keeps us from floating into somebody else while we're sleeping. You have 3 questions. Okay, it's 3 questions.
Well, I mean, you're in a community
It's okay.
college. Do you think that someday you're going to be in space? Is something you always thought of? And then when you get to that point, do you look up on NASA's website, there's an application to become an astronaut? The second one is, you said about heavy things. The next month or two after you were grounded, came back. Were you on a physical therapy or something to help your body get back to Earth? And then he wanted to know, are you going back up, or what does an astronaut do after they go to space?
Okay, so those are all great 3 questions. I'll start with the last one, and hopefully I'll remember the first one. I hope to go up in space again. I'm still an active astronaut in the astronaut corps. There's about 45 of us. We're only flying 4 Americans to space right now, so the line's kind of long, and you know, I'm sort of waiting my turn to go again. So I hope to get a chance to fly in space again. In terms of what we do on the ground when we're not flying in space, we're supporting space flight. So my job in our office is to support ISS operations, which means I make sure that astronauts are trained and ready to go to space. I make sure they have the food, clothing, logistics, supplies that they need while they're in space. And we make sure that they have what they need when they come home, including scheduling their debriefs with the rest of the program and that sort of thing. And we support their families as well. So astronauts have different jobs when they're not flying in space, but everything we do involves supporting people that are in space or supporting the development of the new spacecraft to get ready to send more humans to space. I think the second question was it about recovery when we come home, physical recovery? So we don't, we do have physical rehab therapy, and that's especially true for the astronauts that stay in space for 6 months. We have physical therapists and what we call astronaut strength and conditioning and rehab specialists, and they work with us to basically help us get our balance back, help make sure we maintain our strength while we're in space, and get you on a program to essentially retrain your body how to walk with a normal gait and do all the things that we do in gravity environments. So it does take some time. We say that for every day in space, you need about a day of rehab on Earth to get back to where you were, and everything's kind of normal. Although nothing ever really goes completely back to normal. Space is very hard on the body, especially after 6 months. After a year, it will be even worse. So there are some lingering effects to spaceflight that astronauts suffer from. Some of them are more serious than others, and it affects everybody differently. So we do have some challenges with long-duration spaceflight. And then I think the first question was about applying to the program. How do you decide or get into it? NASA, every country has its own program for applying to the space program. With NASA, every 2 to 5 years, NASA puts out communique that says we're accepting applications for the program, and you fill out a really long 15-page application and send in all your supporting documentation, and then you cross your fingers and hope that somehow you get selected or seen, or maybe you've made contact with another astronaut or somebody that gives you that opportunity to continue on in that pursuit. But it really is all about filling out an application. I'm a civilian. I never served in the military. The astronaut corps is half military, half civilian. The military program advances individuals or nominates them to go and apply to the program, but they get thrown into the same pool that we do. And so we compete with them directly, but their organizations nominate them to go into that pool, and we as civilians just apply on our own to the program. Go ahead.
Can you describe re-entry? Is violent as takeoff, or?
In the Soyuz spacecraft, from what I've heard, it's pretty violent and pretty obnoxious and very, it gets your attention. They experience up to, I think, 8 or 9 Gs on occasion, and so that can be pretty overwhelming. The space shuttle is actually very benign. It's a little bit like an aircraft, an airplane coming down to land, although it's a glider, so it has no engines powering it down. It's really just a heavy glider. It's like a brick with little wings, and comes down very fast. It has a sort of a rock and roll moment. It feels like you're going down a dirt road at around Mach 1, and it happens to all the space shuttles, and it only lasts for about 30 seconds, but you literally feel like you're in a pickup truck on a really bad dirt road, and everything's just like shaking. The whole thing's just rattling and shaking. It's identical to going down a dirt road in a pickup truck where it's like, and then it stops. It smooths out, and then eventually you just land on the runway. The most unique part about landing in the shuttle is that everything slowly gets heavy. And you're sitting upright like we are today, so a camera, anything that you're holding, M&Ms, whatever, it all slowly gets heavier and heavier and heavier to the point where you just can't hold it up anymore, and you have to set it down, and you have to rest your hands on something because you can't. And everybody kind of slumps in their chair just because gravity, you're not used to fighting gravity for even just for 2 weeks. The space station astronauts come down laying on their back in the Soyuz rocket, and they land on their back, and they stay in that capsule until someone comes in and drags them out and puts them in a lazy boy chair, and then they carry them around for a while until the astronauts slowly get their Earth legs back. Sir?
This lady's getting impatient. Answer her, and then I got a couple comments.
Okay, I'm ready for your question, man. You're up.
Would you like to go to Mars?
Would you like to go to Mars? It's a long ways away. I would like to go to Mars, but I'd like to know that I could come home. So, yeah, certainly would. You want to go? Because you're about the right age to go to Mars. Not now, but when you grow up. I will probably never go to Mars in my career. I'm too old, but you're about the right age that when you become adult, people your age will be going to Mars. Might change your mind.
My comment was, if you've never seen a liftoff, or you've never been to Kennedy Space Center, it's better than going to Disney World or Busch Gardens or SeaWorld. Marilyn and I was fortunate. We've seen her Endeavour liftoff.
You're lucky.
Yeah. We had season passes to Kennedy Space Center. It's something you shouldn't miss. It's unreal. My question is, what are they doing now where they built the shuttles? That area there, they toured you through it?
Yeah.
What are they doing in that area now?
So we're converting all of those structures to support the Orion spacecraft and the commercial companies. They're all getting access to different facilities. They're slowly converting over all of the buildings that were there supporting the shuttle program to commercial crew and the Orion exploration spacecraft. So we're still using them. We're still utilizing Kennedy. And all of our vehicles will launch out of Florida.
I was curious what your opinion is of the commercial and privatized space flight. Are you an advocate, or are there concerns you have?
I think that every astronaut is an advocate of the commercial spaceflight program. The government, we don't have the resources to continue to support space exploration indefinitely. Humans will continue to need to explore space, and the only way to do that is by more humans getting involved. We can't just have the governments funding it and supporting it. We're still going to be government supported for a long time in the foreseeable future, but eventually will commercialize space exploration, and that won't be the government anymore. It's going to have to transition. My honest opinion is that once the energy industry determines that there is a way to take advantage of being in space or operating in space or utilizing resources on a different planet, we'll see a lot more money going into the space program, and we as humans will be operating and working off the Earth and utilizing the resources that may be there that we just don't know about yet.
What is your opinion on the various space movies? Gravity,
Space movies?
Interstellar or Apollo 13?
I love all the space movies. Gravity was a little bit much, but because some of the physics were wrong. But I heard a different take on what gravity really is, and someday, I don't know, maybe the director will tell us it wasn't really about spaceflight at all. But so Gravity was a neat movie because the director actually used the imagery from the Hubble IMAX 3D movie, which is the movie that was made when we serviced the Hubble Space Telescope. He studied that footage and then based all of his Earth imagery on that footage. And so when you watch the movie, as an astronaut, when you watch the movie, it's really neat to see because what's great about Gravity is the images of Earth from space are very realistic. I mean, that's the most realistic you will ever get of seeing Earth from space. So for that movie, I think that was its big highlight. The rest of them, I just like them. I love Star Trek, I love Star Wars, and I thought Interstellar was great. I've read the book, The Martian. Has anybody read that new book, The Martian? I thought that was a great book. It's pretty realistic for where we are in technology right now, and I think they're making a movie out of that one as well, so it'll be neat to see. But I'm a big sci-fi fan. Go ahead.
Could you describe like the food and how you eat it? Like we see this package, but what do you do with it? What is it?
The food is you can eat anything for a short period of time. It's a lot like camping food. Some of it's dehydrated, so we have to rehydrate it. Some of it is thermally stabilized, which means it could survive a nuclear bomb. And then some of it is just off the shelf, like pudding cups or fruit cups, things like that. Canned fish, canned tuna. I think we actually eat some of that stuff in space. So there are a lot of different varieties of food. We fly M&Ms, although I can't tell you we fly M&Ms. We fly all kinds of things like that. We try to fly stuff off the shelf that we can just purchase and we don't have to redevelop space food, but a lot of it is specially formulated for space. And they're slowly trying to get better with nutrition contents and stuff like that.
I was curious about, I read somewhere that they have an engine they're thinking about building, that they just do contracts with to get you to Mars in 40 days and all that.
Yeah, that's
Is that realistic?
it is. In fact, that's in the book, The Martian. It's called the Plasma Ion Engine. And there's an astronaut by the name of Franklin Chang Diaz who has been working on that engine for like 20 years. That will be probably the new technology that we'll use to travel long distances in space. And it's a real motor. We actually use that propulsion type of system on many satellites right now, just smaller versions of it. I think within the next 10 years you'll see, we're going to put, they have a test unit that they're going to fly on the space station and use for a reboost of the space station as well, so it's in development. We'll probably need to fly a nuclear power source to use it though, which has some political implications. Go ahead.
What's your take on the one-way trip to Mars? Do you think is that a bunch of PR, or do you think it's really going to happen?
Mars One?
Well, they're talking about people going there and then not being able
Yeah.
to return.
What's my take on it? I don't really want to go on a one-way trip to Mars, so I don't know. I mean, it's just the human thing that maybe somebody's going to do, that they want to go on a one-way trip and try to colonize Mars. I don't doubt that we as humans will live on Mars someday, and we'll live on the moon someday, much more than we do now, but it's going to be pretty far in the future, I think, by the time we start doing that. Sir?
A few astronauts from previous space programs talked about a spiritual experience once they get into space, having a spiritual revelation of that this just couldn't happen, there's a creator. Did you have any type of feelings like that?
I think, it depends on how you define spirituality. I mean, for me, it was spiritual in the way that I couldn't believe what it was that I was seeing, how vulnerable I felt like Earth was. I also, I think, had a new appreciation for how vast space was, and really really started to question how there can't be life somewhere else in the universe because of the, you know, how infinite space is. And that's especially true because of the images that I see, you know, how connected I feel to Hubble and some of the images that we see from that telescope. I think it changes everybody as a person. I believe that if every human were able to see Earth from space and see space from space, that we would have a different planet. We would communicate differently. We would get along. In other words, we would be much kinder to each other. We would try harder to, you know, work together on our own planet to keep our planet alive. Because eventually, you know, if we continue on the way we're going, we're going to wreck each other or wreck it. So, but everybody, I think, gets changed and affected in some way by being in space. Go ahead.
Is it dangerous to have fire on a rocket ship?
Is it dangerous to have fire on a rocket ship? Yes, fire is dangerous inside a spacecraft. It's not as dangerous as you think. It can be catastrophic, but we have a lot of procedures in place to protect us from fires. Everything we fly in space, we try to make sure is flame retardant. And we also try to have a good understanding of how fires might start and how we could control them. So fire is dangerous. The reason it's dangerous is because you've got nowhere to go. You can't run outside like you can at home and stand on the corner and wait for the fire truck to show up. You either are in the fire in the spaceship or you're leaving in a spaceship that's not on fire. And all of that takes a little bit of effort to make happen. So we try not to start fires in space. No orange, sir?
So once the Hubble is in place, or once it got up there, how does it stay in
orbit?
Orbit, yeah.
So that stays in orbit by what we call orbital dynamics, and it's the velocity of the spacecraft that keeps it in space. For those of you who were at the luncheon earlier, I explained this a little bit, that think of a rock on a string. If you spin the rock fast enough, it stays spinning and keeps the string tight. If you stop spinning that rock, it will eventually fall back towards you in the direction the string's pulling. A rocket's the same way. It's pulling against gravity, but it's going so fast that it's falling around the planet. So as long as it keeps its speed up, it can keep the string of gravity tight and continue to orbit. As soon as it slows down, it will come back to Earth and be sucked in by Earth's gravity. So the Hubble Space Telescope is high enough up. It doesn't have a propulsion system, but it's high enough up that its orbit doesn't decay for, I don't know, 100 years or something like that. It eventually decays, but it takes a long time. Sir?
The space is the present site.
How large is the largest spacecraft?
How large is the largest astronaut? Well, the two guys that I flew with on the Hubble mission, Scott Altman and Mike Massimino, are probably the two largest U.S. astronauts. They're actually probably the two largest astronauts of all the Europeans and Russians as well. And I think Mike Massimino is like 6'3" or 4", and Scott Altman is 6'2" or something like that, 220. Pretty big guys. In the back, sir, go ahead.
How does as the Hubble falls around the Earth, how does it focus on one spot? And how does it orient itself? I imagine it's very complicated, but I would imagine this power. Does it have jets to do?
No, it has gyros. It has spinning gyros in it that it has 4 of them, and by torquing each of those gyros differently, it can actually change the orientation of the telescope and then hold it in a singular position. And it uses battery power that's fed from the solar rays to feed the batteries, and then those feed the gyros to help them spin. Sir in blue.
How long would it take to get to Mars?
Right now, how long would it take to get to Mars? I think it's like a 8-month trip, something like that, and then you can stay for 2 weeks, and then you have to come home, and that's another like 9 months or a year. There's some cycles where the front end's longer than the back end, but it's basically a 1.5 years to almost a 2-year trip right now, which is why we're not going to Mars, because if we stay in space for 8 months outside of Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere, then we get super radiated, and it'd be like getting x-rays every day for the rest of your life. It's not good for the human body, so we need to go faster to get to Mars. What's your what? The tools? The tools are made out of, some of them are made out of titanium and some of them are made out of milled aluminum. Similar to what tools are made out of, some are made out of steel.
Can you explain the new process, like on the shuttle missions, is it all done from the ground, or do they give you, directions from the ground and then the pilot does it, or?
For the which,
For any of the shuttle missions, not yours in particular, I suppose.
which phase of flight?
While you're in orbit, making corrections while you're up there.
In terms of position and altitude and whatnot?
Well, I guess it is.
So,
Was there any moves that need to be made after the initial launch?
there are maneuvers, and most of those are pre-designed and pre-programmed, and we will, for the shuttle missions, we receive instructions with basically data fields from mission control, and then we enter those in manually into the spacecraft's computer and program the burns, so we don't come up with the data that defines the different adjustments in orbital altitudes, but we input that information and then initiate the rockets. No, what was it?
It's surprising, like once the thrusters kick on, I'm like, just kind of like.
Yeah, it is actually. You can feel. I mean, it'll throw you to the back of the rocket. It's not violent or anything like the initial liftoff, but if you're holding something and let go of it, it'll take off to the back of the craft.
I understand when you get up there, you're all astronauts, so your own specialties, pilots and engineers and whatnot. But as you're training, and then when you're up there and you have your idle time, your pilots from all over the world. Do you ever talk about different cultures or politics or anything, especially if you have a couple of Russians?
Yeah, you do, but I mean, you spend a lot of time training with these individuals on the ground before you go to space. And you know each other pretty well, and you've probably covered all the bases by the time you go into space with them. We don't spend a lot of time with the Russians on orbit, except for occasionally getting together for meals, because they have a lot of work to do in their section, and we have a lot of work to do in ours, so you don't really interact with them during the day. But you spend time looking out the window, taking pictures, eating meals together. It's just like you would here on Earth if you were having dinner with somebody from a different country, But you get to know them very well before you fly to space with them. Go ahead and back.
Have you always wanted to be an astronaut?
Have I always wanted to be an astronaut? Mom, have I always wanted to be an astronaut? She says no. I was interested in space from an early age and just slowly, I think, developed a keener interest as I got older and older. I just thought when I grew up that we would all be going to space all the time and that would be a normal workplace for all of us, just like the Jetsons, but it's the Flintstones. We're still Stone Age. Little girl here. You again, yep, go ahead.
When's the next time you're going to the moon?
When's the next time I'm going to the moon? I don't know. I hope to be able to go to space within the next 5 years. That's my intent.
Can they not pressurize the cargo bay of the shuttle when you were working on the satellite? Wouldn't it have been easier to pressurize it so you could work out without using the suits instead of being inside the cargo bay in a space?
There's not enough room. The telescope's way too big. It launched in the shuttle payload bay, but it took up every ounce of space. With the payload bay doors closed, you couldn't have fit a human without a spacesuit around the sides of it. It could only be serviced standing on end with us in spacesuits working on it.
So you can pressurize the cargo.
You cannot, and you cannot pressurize that. It doesn't hold pressure.
Okay.
Not the way the cabin does. And the other thing is to develop an environmental control system that is redundant and fail-safe for that large of an area with those big doors on it would be pretty tenuous and risky. So it's better to have an integral, a shell that's built as one unit, like the shuttle cockpit was. Back.
To what degree are you exposed to cosmic radiation and cosmic energy?
To the degree that it's out there, we're exposed to it. I mean, we're inside the Earth's magnetosphere, so we don't get as much as if we were farther away from the planet, even on the way to the moon. But I can tell you that at night when astronauts close their eyes, their eyeballs get bombarded with light flashes, and those are basically particles that are charged particles that are going through your eyes and your body while you're sleeping.
So it goes right through the actual...
It goes right through you, and when you close your eyes, it's like watching a light show. You see things going like right across, you know, in your vision. It's basically something passing through your eye, because they're just particles.
Okay, the second part of my question, for a better choice of words, is there a certain period of time where you actually have to detox before you enter the general public after you come back to Earth?
No, I mean, it's not like we get radiated up there. We just are exposed to cosmic radiation more so than we are. I mean, we're getting exposed to it here on Earth, but the atmosphere filters a lot of it out.
Okay.
So we don't come back radiated like you would if you were around a nuclear power plant or something like that.
You were flying to the telescope and you said you're looking at loggers the whole time. How long of a trip was that?
The question is, how long is a trip to space? And it's 8 minutes. It takes us 8 minutes to get from the launch pad to about 100 miles above the planet. It's a pretty short ride. Yeah. And it's only 300 miles. So.
You spoke about 100 different tools that you had to make for your mission. Have any of those tools been applied to things on Earth, or has the technology that you have caused other advancements to technology on Earth, or does Earth technology bring advancements to what you do in your missions?
With respect to those tools, we haven't used any of those tools from the Hubble mission on Earth. We have used those tools on other space missions, though, that we developed. In terms of, your other question kind of relates to, really, in a broader sense, what's the purpose of the work that we do in space? And the purpose of the work and the experiments that we do in space is really for the benefit of the Earth. So we have a saying that's off the Earth, for the Earth. Everything we do is either about understanding what it takes to have humans live in space, or understanding more about disease or agriculture or material science, so that we can develop better, we can better those things that we have on Earth, whether they're drug treatments or understanding how crops could grow, all those, some of those aspects. Everything we do is with the intent of trying to benefit some aspect of life on Earth.
I was surprised when they sent that Hubble space telescope up and that mirror was out of focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the Hubble launched in 1990, and the mirror was flawed. They didn't grind it quite right, and but if that wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have been able to visit it 5 times with astronauts to fix it. So I'm okay with it, and it's been, it's been doing a great job ever since. So is that everybody? One more? Yeah, go ahead. Have I seen anything unusual in space? You mean like aliens? I haven't seen any aliens in space, and I don't know anybody that has. I've seen the Earth from space. That was pretty unusual. That was about the most unusual thing I saw. My favorite part of the missions? The favorite part of the first mission was coming out of the space shuttle for the first time in a spacesuit and opening up the hatch and staring down on planet Earth. That's pretty favorite. And that was the first time I ever came out the door. And the favorite part of my second mission was the last time before I came in a spacesuit. I was at the top of the space station, taking pictures with a camera that was mounted to the side of my spacesuit, and my objective was to climb up to the highest point on the space station truss, use something we call a BRT, which is a body restraint tether. It's basically a tube that we can tighten down. So essentially I was on top of the space station with my face facing the direction that we were flying, kind of like Superman just sitting there, and then I watched the sun rise directly in front of me, and I was just staring. My job was sit there for 20 minutes and let this camera take pictures of this thing. And so I said, okay, I climbed up there and I waited, and it was nighttime, and then soon enough, sure enough, the sun slowly started coming over the horizon, and I I didn't have anything to do but sit there and just stare at it coming up over the horizon of the Earth, and that was just, you know, those images are just stuck. It's just, with the sun, it was literally seared into my brain, but it's, that was the second most favorite time to be in space.
This isn't a question, it's actually for your mom and your family, but thank you for your support so that men and women like this can do this, because I can't imagine what it would be to support when they're trained and then when they're gone and the lift off and the just land Earth, get back on Earth, you know, the feelings like that. So thank you for that.
And I'm about out of made-up answers, so thanks everybody for coming tonight.
I hope you will agree that it's been a fascinating discussion and something that, well, all of us can live vicariously through and just to be amazed at some of these experiences. We thank you for coming and we thank you very,
You're welcome.
very
My
much.
pleasure.